Thank you. Item 10. And I'll just wait for young Jenny to come up here. So look, Councillor Collins, if you would move this particular item, and I will second it. And Jenny, welcome to the Town Hall. And look, just to let everybody know, your history with Manukau as well, way back in the day, goes many, many years. And also with Collindale Park and the leases. Again, I've acknowledged Martin Devoy, but you've also been crucial in regards to these leases. So look, just wanted to sort of acknowledge that, and then just leave it to you to sort of go through.
Thank you, Chair.
And there is a PowerPoint that's on Nexus. Kia ora, Jenny.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'm Jenny Young. I'm the Community Lease Specialist for the Otara Papatoetoe Local Board area. So this is just an overview from our map system of where the park sits in relation to the South Auckland area. So it's on the flight path there of Auckland Airport. It's next to Puhanui Reserve, and it's off Puhanui Road, which is the new transport link through Puhanui Station, the eastern link to Auckland Airport. So it's will shortly be very well served by public transport. So just a brief history of what has happened in this land. So in 2003, Manukau City Council purchased this land for wheeled and motorsports park. So they developed concept plans during a number of years with users, possible future users of the park. Resource consent was granted in 2013 for the activities envisaged. In 2014, public notification of the intention to grant leases was advertised, and in November 2015, agreements to lease were granted to 4 community groups and 2 commercial operators. So this shows those allocations of land at that time. So the blue area was set aside for future development, other users to come onto the park, and motocross and jet sprint, the 2 in the middle, along each side, they are the commercial users, and the others are the community sporting groups. In 2016, after the award of the agreements to lease, 3 of the 4 community sport groups signed their agreements. Kartsport Manukau Incorporated were the only group not to sign. They went through a process of internal review of their best structure to take the development forward, and in March 2017 they dissolved that entity and a new Collindale Park Kartsport Development Trust was formed. So that is the entity that is being tasked with developing the park. It is not necessarily the entity that will undertake the sporting activities on the park, although they may evolve into that once the development is over. So over the past couple of years, all of the community agreement holders have been looking at reconfiguration of the sites to support future development. And so what the groups have come up with, so again on the left is the original allocations of land, and what is being proposed today is that radio control cars and kart sport under a single lease under the Kartsport Development Trust would have what had originally been set aside for the future development area, and the ex-kart sport site on the front of the park is for excuse me, future development for any other users who may come onto the park. So in March of last year, the new trust made an application for a lease or a licence to agreement to lease to develop land on Collindale Park. And at that time, the Otara Papatoetoe Local Board reiterated their wish that this park be a regional asset. and formally resolved that in December of last year, and that's the item that you've just considered. So happy to answer any questions, Mr. Chair.
Kia ora, Jenny. I'll go to Councillor Walker. Councillor Walker, in the last item you had a question around the Mount Wellington kart sport, I think, so I'll open it up to you, and then I've got Councillor Cooper next. Councillor Walker, I'll, if we're having issues with the sound, I'll move on to Councillor Cooper and Hills and come back to you. Councillor Cooper.
Thank you. It's around the recommendation C4C, and I'm asking because it was brought up earlier by Councillor Hills around in the future if kart sport doesn't exist in the form we know it. Here we've got, it says specifically in the conditions that any buildings will be owned and maintained by the leasee. Is there any provision there, for example, if that came about, that wasn't an existing sport or it wasn't electric, that there is a responsibility for the leasee to either remove or demolish the building so that it can be left in its state that it was given to them, just like a normal lease of a building or something like that, sort of a make good provision, because often we get left with these things and council has to pick up the tab, because I think that was a concern earlier around having to spend money that we might not need to.
Thank you. Councillor Cooper, through you, Chair. Yes, that's standard conditions in the community leases, that there are a series of options from removal and reinstatement, and on sell with the approval of the council, or council may take over the asset with no compensation being paid.
So will that be under E with the all other terms and conditions in E? Okay, thank you.
Yes, yes.
I've left a message with Councillor Walker there when he's ready to let me know on chat. So I'll go to Councillor Hills.
Sweet. Kia ora, thank you, and I know this is complicated, and I could feel a collective sigh when I brought it up before, but I guess my concern is that the climate impact statement says there'll be no increase or a minor increase, but I guess when we're signing leases on something that is sort of at odds with our climate impact and our climate plan, and also at odds with the number one or one of the top goals in our 10-year budget. How do we work with the leaseholders going forward, much like what Councillor Cooper was saying, but more on the fact with, are you using the cleanest petrol you can? What are you doing? What are the leaseholders doing in the climate space? And are we ensuring that we prepare? So like in Formula E, they're having massive issues in Australia and other areas that the infrastructure just isn't there to provide the super fast charging and different things. So over time, if there was provision being thought of while we develop this park, are we keeping that all in mind, or are we building a park? Are we, making decisions now that really aren't fit for 10 to 20 years? My question is not about cancelling motorsport, because I know that Formula E and other things are getting really popular, but I'm just worried we're going to be slow followers as opposed to leaders in this space if we are making sure we're not ruling things in or out.
Thank you, Councillor, through you, Chair. The development of Collindale Park as a wheeled and motorsport park brings together provision of those sports that are currently being held across the region. So it's bringing them together into one place. As to the future, once a group receives a lease on council land, they have quiet enjoyment of that space. They have exclusive use and quiet enjoyment of that space. All of the user groups work together with our park staff. They have for 3 or 4 years now met monthly and work through issues. At the moment, they've been about the development of the park. Under the resource consent, that committee was set up. It will continue into the future, and as developments worldwide for cleaner, greener sports, no doubt they will be part of discussing those kinds of issues in the future.
Okay, thank you. And just a small follow-up, Chair, just through you. I guess my point is sort of like what we've done with smoking and safety over time. So we require updates to leases or stronger kind of expectations, even though they basically have legal right over those spaces. But, you know, we ask for no smoking and things like that. If climate outcomes could be, you know, brought into that thinking along the way, and that's about travelling to and from, but also the use of that space. So it's not just left up to council to deal with, because a lot of people are giving me feedback. Why are you approving these things which are at complete odds with the climate plan? But of course we have existing uses and people that need to transition. But I guess I'm just hoping we bring that in as early as possible as opposed to at the end. Thank you.
Okay, I'll take you off the comment list, and then I'll go back to the questions. Councillor Walker.
Sure. So I've just got a question that goes to points 28 through to 31, where it mentions plans for the park on the part of the Colindale Kart Sport Development Charitable Trust, and it makes mention of the Auckland Motorcycle Club, the University of Auckland team, and the Speed Skaters Club. Has there been any direct communication with those clubs? Because my understanding is that there's been very little communication between them and kart sport over Colindale Park.
Thank you, Councillor. Through you, Chair. My dealings have been with the Trust. It is the Trust who will hold the lease. So they have indicated to me that those other groups have shown an interest in hiring their space once it is developed. And again, that's the conversations that those two groups need to hold. As the landlord, we don't get involved necessarily with those kinds of discussions.
Okay, I'm just raising a concern that I would suggest that as the landlord that has an interest in motorsport and these various clubs in general, that we do have an interest in liaising more directly and not making the assumption necessarily that adequate communication is taking place, because the history of late is that communication has been woefully inadequate. So is it possible for us to liaise directly with a number of these clubs, as we would normally with many clubs that use our parks?
So Wayne, just to confirm what Ginny's just explained, and the fact that if this goes through Colindale Kart Sport Development Charitable Trust, we'll end up having the lease. It is their responsibility in regards to speaking with those. So I'm not going to put the onus on Jenny or our staff to end up telling the Colindale Kart Sport Development Charitable Trust what to do. I think it'll be hazard to guess that maybe a suggestion can be made, and Jenny's nodding that, and that suggestion will be made. But apart from that, that's really all we've got.
Okay, just through you, Mr. Chair, I would suggest that Auckland Council and Parks do have policies around multisport, and we do have direct engagement with various clubs and entities, irrespective of lease arrangements. The lease arrangement may well be a convenience that does not adequately reflect the use of the land by a particular group.
Yep, thank you for your comments. Councillor Watson.
Okay, thanks, Mr. Chair. Just a question. So point 29, in terms of this charitable trust that's been sent up identifies the expected users of the proposal to have been to be the Auckland Motorcycle Club, the University of Auckland Formula SAT Club, E-Velocity and the Mount Wellington Speed Skaters Club. Has the Trust had any conversations with any of those groups in the last 2 years?
Again, through you, Mr. Chair, I do not know because I do not deal with those organisations. I deal with the prospective leaseholder.
Okay, so are you aware that in the past senior figures in the council have advised those groups, in particular the Motorcycle Club, have criticised them, in fact, for not having a direct relationship with council and for actually going into the sort of arrangement that's being proposed here? They have been criticised by council officers for that dependency arrangement in terms of the things that have happened to their sport.
So Councillor Watson, just to be clear in regards to where we're heading with this, is that I can understand the context that you're asking these questions on, and that is the lease to the lease to the Collindale Car Sport Development Charitable Trust. This is why the decision in regards to this, whether they have been criticised or not, I don't think it's really a question that should be put to our staff. So in regards to that, I think when we get to the recommendation, there's a choice in regards to supporting this or not.
Yeah.
If we could sort of look at to see, because Jenny's indicated that she doesn't know and she hasn't heard the criticism that you've outlined.
Yes. So that's concerning because we seem to be on the one hand just repeating the process in the past that has resulted in these very clubs that are identified here, Mr. Chair. So we're talking about clubs that have been specifically identified, and a number of whom now who are without a facility, yet we're proposing that they go back to an arrangement, a hopeful arrangement, that has resulted in their current predicament. And you mentioned staff. These are conversations that have been made with other council staff. So that's a little disturbing. These sports have all got different needs. Although they're motorsports, they're a bit like soccer and rugby and hockey. They have different needs in terms of a facility. So I would have thought that if we're mentioning expected users, as we're doing here, that there would have been some conversation with those expected users and the trust and the council, neither of which has happened. So these names of these clubs are being put up as possible or not possible expected users. There's no discussions with them. Their needs are different. They have been told in the past to have a direct relationship with council, and none of these things have happened. So it does affect the recommendation here. We all want this to move on, but what guarantee, we'll put it another way, and this is a question for Jenny, and it's a very important, it's a fundamental question. Jenny, what guarantee can you give councillors today that these expected users that you've identified will be accommodated in the facility in the manner that's being suggested here, given that there have been no discussions at all and that they have different requirements, which could perhaps be addressed if they were in discussions, but they're not? Could you answer that, please?
Chairman, Kart Sport Mount Wellington, as an incorporated society, is one of the settlors of the trust. So they are one of the groups that set up the development, Collindale Kart Sport Development Trust. We have the president in the room with us today, and he's just passed me a note to say that Kart Sport Mount Wellington has talked to all 4 groups within the past 2 years.
Well,
okay.
All I would say to that is that seems to be at odds with what the groups are actually saying themselves. Yes, they did have a discussion about 2 years ago, a very general one, but there has been nothing since then. So we seem to have contradictory information that's being passed here. So, for instance, to give you an example, that's not just with the motorcycle races, with the Speed Skaters Club, are you aware that for their facility they require a more oval type of arrangement to their racing? Has there been a discussion with them as to how that will be accommodated by the trust?
So look, John, before we get into a to and fro, which is, I'm thinking is going to end up going that way, I am going to take the word of the president who's in the room, that there have been some conversations. So, Councillor Watson, sorry, yeah, not John, sorry, Councillor Watson. So what I'm going to suggest at least, if you wish to end up speaking to the president, I will obviously have a conversation myself with them, and then at least instead of getting in he said, she said, he said, she said, at least we'll get exactly from the president.
Well, I guess, you know, that may be useful or not, but I'm saying I've talked directly to some of the groups that are involved within the last 24 hours. So that's who I'm going on. But my question is for the council's responsibility here, and I guess it's a simple question, but it's a fundamental question as to the surety going forward, and is what guarantee can the officers give us that the groups that have been identified here as expected users are being communicated with this, which is pretty fundamental. That's a reasonable expectation. So I'm asking our officers who are in charge of this process, what guarantee can they give us that the various entities they have identified here are being included in discussions, which is obviously going to be fundamental to the successful operation of this trust and the facility.
Yeah, look,
that's for the officers.
Yep. Well, Councillor Watson, what I'm going to suggest is, and it's been indicated by the president here, is that firstly, I don't think our staff will be able to say that we will get them to talk. It has been indicated by the president that he has.
With all respect, Mr. Chair, I'm not talking about the president. I'm talking about the council. I'm dealing with the council officers here, and I'm asking them.
Councillor Watson, out of courtesy, because I started talking, I haven't finished. Out of courtesy, what I am saying is that the staff cannot end up forcing anybody to have these discussions. The surety is in regards to the president, who has said not only that there is discussions, but there will be ongoing discussions with them. In regards to what happens and what develops out of those, that will not be up to us. So Jenny, I would leave it at that. So Councillor Watson, are there any other questions that you have?
With due respect, my question was for the officer, Mr. Chair. Unless you, as chair of the committee, get assurance that there are going to be discussions with the entities that have been identified here as expected users, and that the council is taking responsibility or some oversight for that, then the question remains unanswered, as do the uncertainties as to whether this facility will be suitable or whether these entities will be involved. You can't have it both ways. You can't mention a group as expected users, then say that there is no council responsibility or due process in ensuring that they're involved in a reasonable way to accommodate for any use that they might envisage. Okay. So I asked the officers, are they going to take any responsibility for that?
So I've already explained, Councillor Watson, so please, if you've got any further questions, I'll then move into Councillor Coombe, but it's been indicated
so that remains unanswered, so I reserve my right to speak to this item.
Thank you, Councillor Watson. Councillor Coombe.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Kia ora. I just wondered if I could ask a question just about the park generally. Is it all right? Just not being familiar with the park. Is it okay?
Nothing to do with Speedway or...
Well, it's to do with motorsport. So maybe I could, because I have to admit that I'm not familiar with this park whatsoever and have never visited. But I'm just curious to know, we've heard a lot about the concerns of four-wheel drive users destroying our natural beaches. And I just wondered, does this area facilitate in the future potential location where four-wheel drive users would be able to go?
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. I'm not aware of those discussions, those future discussions. My role as the lease specialist is dealing with the contractual arrangements between council and community groups on council land. So,
Kia ora, Mr. Chairman and councillors. You'll notice on the previous item that it shows, and certainly within this item, that there's an off-road racing or an off-road facility there that is a four-wheel drive facility, and does allow that type of activity within a controlled environment in this park.
Right, thank you. That's what I was looking at, what that meant in terms of off-road. And may I just make an observation, Mr. Chair? I'm very happy to support this, but A is not a decision, and I just wonder if there needs to be a rethink about. I would have thought every recommendation needs to be a decision. It's A is grant subject to those things, but I just leave that for you for advice. Thank you.
Okay, I'll let the team behind sort that one out, Councillor Coombe. Deputy Mayor.
Thanks, Mr. Chair, and thanks, Jenny. Good report. The question I have is concerning all of the groups that are using this. I'm going to strongly support carts. I think they're evolving into a really strong club, and utilisation is great for Auckland. The general access ways that all the organisations are going to use, including the horse group, which are on Puanui itself, is that work started, and is there work being done as part of the lease around the actual, all that stuff is fit for purpose?
Thank you, Councillor, through you, Chair. Access to the park is being improved at the moment. Right on the junction of Collindale Park, off to your right when you come down Prices Road, or you go straight ahead to Puanui Reserve, a big roundabout's going in there because there is a link road through to the industrial area at what's called McLaughlin's Mountain, and then that road, Prices Road, I believe, will be realigned onto Puanui Road with a controlled intersection traffic lights. So the safety issue will be taken care of, because it's something I thought of when you drive out of Prices Road and want to turn right to go back. Horse trucks, trucks with bikes or whatever on the back, there will be a controlled intersection. It'll be much, much safer.
Thanks, Jen. It was great to actually hear that's happening. I was wondering about those bulldozers and diggers there for you, are they?
Just in addition to that, Mr. Chairman and Deputy Mayor, within the park itself, those landowner works that you approved in 2018 increased the parking capacity and access into Puanui Reserve, which will be used not only for Collindale Park users, but also any use in Puanui Reserve.
Thank you.
Councillor Bartley, the last that I see in regards to questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you. I'm wondering, is there any way that we can accommodate another lease? Because I notice here we've got new site allocations, and I have been out to the site, and it is massive. So is there any way, because I have some sympathy for the Mount Wellington Kart Club bucket races, because, you know, it is a low participation sport, and our sports policy is trying to look at different diverse sports and how we support them, and this one definitely is, you know, has participants, although it's dying because it doesn't have the Panmure site anymore. But is there a way that it can be incorporated under its own lease in this situation somehow? Because that is where they fell into difficulties at Panmure, was that they were not even on the lease. And so I have some sympathy for what Councillor Watson is saying. We're asking them to do the same situation here. However, there's no certainty around that with the current trust that's holding the lease. So is that an option? I'm just trying to find a way to get this.
Thank you, Councillor.
sorted.
Through you, Mr. Chair. The aerial shot that I've shown in image D, which follows paragraph 26, that outlines the proposed siting of this proposed lease and the other leaseholders, and there's an area there for future development, which is right on the front of the site at the entry, that is set aside for future development, and so it will be for the council in future to consider any approaches from other wheeled and motorsport providers or groups or clubs to have a lease on this park.
Okay. Still worried about the group though, because that was the option we told them when we kicked them out of Pamua, was that they could go over to Collindale. So it would be good to have some certainty around that for the group. So
I don't know whether we can give them certainty, because as Jenny's already explained around, the discussions and Councillor Watson's raised them as well.
Yeah.
I think the fact that we've got the president of the new entity here and the note that he's already given, it's really leaving it to the discussions with them, because it's just not making any promises we can't as a council fulfil. That's the issue I have, is saying, look, you're definitely going to be there, when in fact once we end up having the discussions there may not be room. But I don't know. I'm not going to preempt any discussions that are going to happen, and I believe will continue to happen.
Okay. All right. Taking that as far as I can take it. Now I have another question, which I think is for Mace, if that's okay, please, Mr. Chair. So I've been out to the site, and there's pretty much nothing there, nothing at all. This money that we've allocated, I don't think you're even going to get a building out of it. Over there. So are we, by approving this lease, are we tying ourselves into some kind of commitment to keep providing financial investment into the infrastructure out there? Because it does need infrastructure. So that's what I'm worried about. Are we, by doing this lease?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, Councillor Bartley, the investment for the landowner enabling works are largely groundworks to enable the leaseholders and provide those shared facilities such as car parking, lighting, electricity and water supply to enable the development. So the most advanced developments that you may recall are the motocross track, which is pretty built facilities around that, the jet sprint course, which is a commercial operation, in fact, and then more recently the off-road facility has been developed in form of a track, but and BMX is the other site that's been developed. So there aren't any particular built facilities in the nature of buildings. It's more about the tracks and those facilities.
And also, if I can add to that, part of the kart sport proposal is a building that would be shared, would be used by all the users on the park. So, and that would be owned by that group.
Okay.
So
my concern
owned and maintained. And
right, thank you. My concern was we give them the lease, we put them there, and then we don't do anything else there, and then we're just leaving them in the middle of nowhere. But because we've got no money to do any new builds, but all good.
Councillor Cooper, did you have a question or comment? Which is next? Yeah, okay. There's no further questions I can't see online or here. So Jenny, Mace, thank you. And look, let's now get into the comments and debate. Thank you, Jenny.
thank you.
Thanks, Mace. So we'll move into comments. The situation that Councillor Coombe pointed out has been resolved. Thank you. And so we'll move into comments. Councillor Walker, Watson, and then Cooper.
Sure. So as I indicated through my questions, I've got some pretty significant concerns around this lease that we're entering into. Obviously, the history goes back a little bit, but it's been very, very obvious, and I know Dave Stewart and Mace ward are acutely aware that a range of users under a previous lease, and I'm talking about the lease at Tainui Road, effectively meant that a number of motorsports and skaters were cut out and not recognised. So they were not adequately recognised by officers, and nor for that matter were they provided for by kart sport. So that is the immediate history that we have, and we appear to be repeating history by simply having a lease with one entity, though it is purporting to take into account the needs of others. I don't know what the arrangements are within the lease. I don't know what the governance arrangements are. I don't know what funding arrangements are, what issues there are around design, though it does state under A4 that the landlord will approve the final design. It is very clear, and I think Macewood and Dave Stewart and others would know, that the council does have a direct role to engage directly with codes and with users. So my suggestion, Mr. Chair, is that we should really be deferring this item. I don't know that there is any immediacy about it, and we should look at what is a better form of lease and an improved form of governance arrangement to go forward around what is frankly a rather valuable piece of land and a circumstance where, as it goes to motorsport in Auckland, we appear to be confining much of motorsport on this one site. So there's an even greater priority to ensure that we have an arrangement that works for all the users, not just the ones that might happen to have the lease, because that may be a historical arrangement. But I'd suggest it is an arrangement that we know has not worked and is not good governance into the future. So I will be voting against this part of the item.
No, that's good then, because that is your option. So look, Councillor Watson.
You should see that I sent through an amendment earlier, Mr. Chair, amendment there that Council asked the Trust to report back on the discussions it is having with the expected user groups. I don't think that runs contrary to anything that's in the recommendation, so I'm putting that up as an amendment.
Happy to second that.
So Councillor Watson, before, because through standing orders, if it is, we will go to the amendment. I'm asked our director to talk with directly with the President in regards to this, based on what Jenny Young said earlier, that we can't compel the leaseholder if this goes through. So they're just having discussion. So it's really up to you now whether you wish this amendment to be discussed and voted on, or wait until the conversation that the director is having with them. So it's your choice.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, you'll see that I've used the word ask the Trust to report back on the discussions. So that's you know, that's not a command. And no. I would say that if everything we've read in our report is consistent with what we're being told, then this is a very reasonable request.
So what I've asked the director to do is to ask them, and that's what we're trying to do now, to try and sort something out. So look, yeah. I'll let the director just sort of comment, and then I'll be guided by you, Councillor Watson.
So kia ora koutou, and thank you for the opportunity to give you an update. So we appreciate your comment, Councillor Watson. I've just had a very brief chat to Brent, who is sitting in the audience, who is involved but not on the trust of the kart sport. So the challenge is, if we put an amendment, we might not be able to have the jurisdiction to enforce that. So my recommendation is, if we make an amendment, we amend the wording to something like that the PACE committee requests council officers to seek for the trust to provide updates on the communication rather than to direct them to do so. Because we don't have the jurisdiction to direct them, I believe, and we just need to be mindful about our scope and also maintaining positive relationships.
Okay, well, that's actually not the essence of what I'm looking to achieve in my amendment here. And if council is the one that is granting this lease, which we are today, then that seems to offer no surety to the expected user groups that council officers have referred to in their report of being potential beneficiaries here, which therefore really alters the kind of essence of the proposal in terms of its wider usage. So unless there's a reason understanding orders why my amendment cannot be passed, and I've referred to the word ask. Ask isn't a directive or a command, so it doesn't deal with the compulsion you're referring to there, then my amendment should stand. And as I said, unless you're going to give a different interpretation of the word ask, then what has just been given by way of explanation isn't really relevant.
So look, as I said earlier, there was a compromise. It hasn't been reached in regards to your amendment because you've said now that that you wish that amendment to be put. We will have to now discuss it under the standing orders, and we will vote on your amendment, and then we'll move to the substantive. So we have now got questions and comments on your amendment, and I'm assuming, Councillor Watson, that your amendment would be that Council asked the Trust to report back on the discussions it is having with the expected user groups, and that's moved and seconded by Councillor Walker, so we will discuss that now. So are there any questions in regards to the amendment? Councillor Coombe.
Just a Patai, can you please clarify what you were willing to incorporate into the substantive motion that was consistent with this? Because that just seemed like a very elegant solution, so I'm not quite sure why that's not being accepted. But I mean, it might be that we didn't hear it clearly. So could you just confirm? Thank you.
Councillor Watson said that it didn't cover what his amendment was.
Can you just confirm what it was, the wording?
I'll let the directors repeat.
I actually am hopeful that much of the update that I provided or suggested is actually quite in line with what Councillor Watson's trying to also cover. So excuse me in advance if I have this wrong. The recommendation I'm making is that we request for officers to ask the Trust to provide us updates on the communications that have been held so that we can help inform the committee.
And you were proposing including that in the substantive?
Yeah, but this is why I asked Councillor Watson.
I'd be happy to support that change, but if you want to move ahead with the amendment.
Yeah, but we have to move ahead with the amendment now because it's been put. So any questions on the amendment? So just to confirm, Councillor Watson's amendment is ask the Trust to report back on the discussions it is having with the expected user groups, which I thought was very similar to what the director said, but Councillor Watson has indicated that it's not, therefore then we are discussing the amendment as we have to through standing orders. So are there any comments in regards to, or questions? Councillor Dalton.
So just a point of clarification. I think that the difference is report back on the discussions it is having and report back on the discussions that have been had. that's different.
And perhaps what we can do is we can incorporate both. It sounds like it's useful to clarify what may have already happened, to avoid the quote, he said, she said, that was raised before, and also what they're expecting to continue to have. My main amendment was we need to be just cautious about our directive to the trust, and rather that it would be a request to the trust.
Councillor Dalton.
I think the point that Councillor Watson made about we've listed the groups, so we have an interest now into how those discussions might go, and that's simply based on history and what we've experienced in the past. We don't want that to happen again, so we would want to understand that I don't know about the content of the discussions. I see the line, I appreciate the line, but I also appreciate that we don't want to be coming back in a year's time and find out that actually that didn't work out and we had no oversight of it, but because councillors clearly are having conversations. So and even both amendments are a little vague in terms of accountability on what that report back is.
Yeah, so I'm only guided by the amendment that Councillor Watson's put up, and I've been advised that we need to now discuss the amendment in regards to support or not. If I start, I'll get Councillor Watson to start off first in regards to his amendment, and then I'll open it up for discussion, and then I will then put it to vote. Councillor Watson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Councillor Dalton is absolutely right. It is a very general and vague and rather kind of soft request, and it really is that way because it's trying to reflect the spirit of good intent and incorporation that has been reflected in the report itself. As I said, and I'm quoting directly from the report itself now, that when we get to point 29, we have the various expected user groups identified. The Trust has presented revised plans to adopt a multi-use motorsport facility. The expected users of the proposed facility are diverse, and we have 4 that are identified there: the Auckland Motorcycle Club, the University of Auckland Formula Team, E-Velocity, and the Mount Wellington Speed Skaters Club. Now, any of the councillors that have been around for a little while will know that a number of those user groups are the very same users groups who have found themselves without a facility as a consequence of being in exactly the same position at Mount Wellington. And as a consequence of that, the Mount Wellington Motorcycle Club has essentially become defunct, and all the riders and youth development programs that have occurred have gone into abeyance, and that sport essentially has disappeared from Auckland. Now, I find it, Mr. Chair, a little disappointing that some of the senior figures within the council table who have criticised and encouraged those groups to actually engage directly with the council to ensure that they're not put in that position again, have remained silent when we are just proposing this very instance to put them in that position again. And I can confirm, Mr. Chair, that the president of the Auckland Motorcycle Club has said that they have had no direct discussions with any of the kart bodies. There were some more historic ones back in over 2 years ago, 24 months ago, but that's a lot of water under the bridge in the interim. So I think that we owe it to those expected user groups that have been identified by us in a council report that they are involved in any discussions, because it's very important to note that although they're motorsports, they have different requirements. It's a little bit like comparing the field sports of rugby, soccer, hockey, they have different requirements, and if those requirements are to meet, not least of which are health and safety requirements, there has to be some rudimentary discussion. That hasn't occurred. So it's a little hopeful, given the very recent track record, just to throw it over to the trust, to use the expected user groups as a lever of sorts to justify the propositions being put up, but then to have absolutely no accountability, do something of a Pontius Pilate, wash our hands of any accountability or responsibility for ensuring that the user groups are even communicated with. We're not talking about a facility be provided with them. We're just talking about communication with. I mean, what we're proposing, fellow councillors, is to build the track now and then to have the discussions afterwards, or not to have the discussions at all. Obviously, if you're trying to incorporate a number of different user groups with different requirements, like the speed skaters, for instance, who need more of an oval configuration or else they can't race, then you have to be doing it now. And if this is being advanced on the basis of the goodwill that permeates much of the report, then surely that's a very reasonable expectation to ask the trust that is granting the lease to communicate with the groups involved and to try and meet their needs within the configuration and the planning that has to take place beforehand. If we do not do that, we will almost certainly be repeating what has already happened at Mount Wellington. We know this because we've had that in our very recent past with disastrous results for the clubs involved, not least of which is that one club, a very prominent club with 40 years proud history, has now disappeared. There is nowhere to race in Auckland. So, Mr. Chair, I think this amendment is, as Councillor Dalton said, pretty low key, not setting all that high a bar. It's just asking the trust to report back on the discussions it is having, that this report tells us or suggests that it is having. That's a reasonable expectation. That's something we should be doing as due course anyway. It shouldn't really be having to get put up by an amendment, but it is, and I'd urge everyone to vote for it in that spirit. Thank you.
Councillor Cooper.
I was actually wanting to comment on the substantive.
Yeah, we have to go through this first.
Okay, all right then. So my concerns is around setting a precedent that in leases we start to interfere in the running of these groups. I mean, we're looking to give them a lease, but then we're asking them to get all the resource consents, pay for all the development. We'll do some enabling works. We've said that, but then we start to want to interfere. And to be quite honest, there's often talk about subsidiarity, devolving, letting people do what they need to do, be self-determining. But to me, it sounds like now we're going to be, if we are requiring people to keep reporting back all the time during the time of their lease, there's this expectation on volunteer groups, which they're already quite pressured as it is. They have to write reports, come in here, report to us. When actually, I think it's a level of trust as we should be operating under. And to me, this smacks of not trusting. And it also feels like it's driven by one small group, ginger group, that's push, push, push. The reality is, if this small group that pushes behind the scenes, and we know that in the past we've had some horrific abuse of a past chair of a committee that dealt with this issue, right to the point of death threats. To me, this is the proposed group that is joined together from other groups that's willing to take this on. It's a huge undertaking. Sometimes you can't accommodate everybody. But if this group that wants to do its other kind of work and needs different kinds of facilities, if they really want to do this, they can enter into council with a council and get an agreement to lease a part of this, and they can get the consents and they can build their own track. But to me, this is around being a really small group and want to hang off the end of it and actually call the tune and stop everything else. And actually, we don't have time to defer. This has been going on for years and years and years, way back to Manukau City time when they had a plan change to make this happen. It needs to get on with it. We need to let our community groups get on with this. They've got a long road to hoe still to get their consents and get their funding. So for me, putting an extra onus on them, which we don't do to any other group, we don't do any other leases, seems particularly picking them out for special treatment, which isn't helpful to them. So I can't support this. I'm very happy to have something put in, as Claudia has suggested, to talk to the groups. I've seen in the chamber here our staff talking to Collindale Kart Sport, and I'm sure they're very happy to cooperate in an informal way like that and let us know what's going on. So I can't support this amendment.
Thank you, Councillor Cooper. Look, I'm just going to make my comments now and then move on with the others. Look, I won't be supporting this amendment, and the reason I won't be supporting it is because the recommendations state in the fact that the lease is going to go out to public consultation. Guess what's going to happen with all the groups, and guess what happens to all the people that may oppose this particular lease going to the entity? They will have their say. Also, if you have a look at the recommendations, and I've changed one of them, and the reason, depending on how we get on with this amendment, is that myself, the Deputy Chair and Independent Māori Statutory Board member select the hearings panel when this goes out. Why? I don't know why we have to end up trying to get some discussion through, because I have no doubt at all that the people that have been mentioned with this on number 29 will end up having their say, all right. They will definitely have their say, because it's going out to public consultation. So why are we putting this in? But I left that to Councillor Watson and Councillor Walker to end up having the opportunity and the choice, but they continued with this, and it was their choice. But it goes out to public consultation. Isn't it more important it going out to consultation first to find out what these groups will end up saying about this lease? Isn't it better going out to the public to end up saying, we do not want this group to get the lease, and here are our reasons? Isn't that something that we should, as the hearings panel, when we form one, isn't that the information we want to end up getting from all of our community, including mana whenua? Mana whenua is part of this consultation process when the lease, if we approve this, it goes out for public consultation. So look, I am not going to support this amendment. I'm going to support the substantive, and the reason I want to do that is because it's going out for public consultation. I want to hear what these community groups that have been outlined and mentioned today, I want to hear what they want to say around this lease. I'm now moving to Councillor Mulholland.
Oh, kia ora. Thank you for the opportunity. I'm going to be supporting this amendment because whilst I may be in this first term, I've also watched this process from afar. And so I believe that we do need to look at the matter of fairness and equity and how we establish the ground for working together in the future and listening to voices. And I do fully engage in processes where there is consultation. Thank you, Chair, for raising those matters. I think that's absolutely relevant. My thoughts around the things I've heard and listened to is that whilst there might have been meetings so that people had a view and opinion, there are other groups being put forward, and something that happened 2 years ago may not be relevant today. So kia ora, thank you, Chair, for the opportunity, and also thank you for raising the matter of the consultation, which I think is relevant. But I will be supporting this.
Councillor Walker.
All right, I'm supporting the amendment, Mr. Chair. I think it's entirely reasonable. We know that Council has got existing policies that encourage the best use of reserve space and parks and multiple use, and we know that Council has a direct responsibility to engage with various codes. of course, part of the background to this is we don't have a motorsport strategy that could and should be informing this process. And we know that we have a history of some clubs that have been cut out. I think it's particularly disappointing that we're only treating with one entity in terms of the lease. My understanding is that what the council endeavours to do now is to have more broad governance structures so that a range of groups that are going to be using something have got a stake in the not only the use but an interest in the governance and the lease arrangements, and that is patently not the case here. So I would suggest that this amendment is entirely reasonable. Why wouldn't we encourage these sorts of discussions and this engagement and more involvement on the part of council officers? To not do that is abrogating our responsibility. We wouldn't be doing it with rugby and football and other codes, so why are we going to limit the process here? Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Watson. Councillor Dalton Collins and then Deputy Mayor.
I was Councillor Walker.
No, I'm saying Councillor Dalton Collins and Cashmore's next.
Thank you, Chair. Look, it's all about relationships, isn't it? That is what it's about. And if I reflect on the multi-sports that I've been involved in, and then they don't come with the big history that's here. I understand that there's complications here, but we have always, it is the holder of the lease that has the relationship with the users within those multi-sports. The sports that are in there lobby their councillors all the time about not getting their needs met or, you know, any issues that they might have. That will never change. So because that happens, there does need to be a relationship between council officers being able to report back to the governing body on the matters that we're talking about. So in this specific case, it's the users that are wanting that have been listed in the report. But we need to make sure that relationship does happen. I don't know that it needs to necessarily be through an amendment, but Chair, I was going to ask you, what is in the substantive? Have you changed something? Before we go to vote on this, I'd like to know what is in the substantive. But my point here is that it is about relationships, existing multi-sports. The Trust holds the relationships with all of the clubs that are there, and then we get updated and then lobbied on the side so we know what's going on. Thank you.
So the only change is with C, and because it's going out for consultation, all the groups that have been mentioned, as I said, all the groups that have been mentioned in 29 will be having their say. Now, that won't negate any conversations that the Trust will have, because they may not get the lease depending on the hearings. So what I've changed it, previously it was just the chair will select the hearings panel. I've said no myself, the deputy and independent Māori statutory board member will select the hearings panel that will hear submissions on the lease, because it's going out for public consultation. That's the only change I've done with the substantive. It's just added myself and added Councillor Casey and independent Māori statutory board member to hear the any submissions. So it's going out for public consultation no matter what happens.
I just need a point of clarification, because I think there's a couple of different conversations going on. So I think Councillor Watson and Councillor Walker are clearly saying, can we make sure that the groups listed do not get cut out in other work going forward? So it's probably not even related directly to this particular item. There's two things going on here.
Yeah.
Outside of them having their say on a narrow scope, because it's going to be the consultations just on this bit. There's another issue that's trying to be addressed through the amendment.
So that's why what Jenny said when she gave her report was the fact that there have been ongoing conversations. The dispute that's been arisen is that Councillor Watson has said no, there hasn't. But look, they have had conversations, so that's where this is heading. And that's why, as a result of still saying I want the amendment through, we're still going to have our hearings panel because there will be submissions. This here now is saying that we want to end up getting to report back to us any discussions that with the expected user groups. We've been told there have been discussions, and that's why we've come to this stage.
So I get it. This particular amendment is not actually going to address the broader issue that I think Councillors Watson and Walker have. This is specific to this particular item in which we're going out for consultation. We'll get the submissions, so they will have their say anyway. So actually, that needs to go somewhere else, not here. Yeah, got it. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So, Councillor Collins, and then Deputy Mayor.
Kia ora, Chair, and thanks for the chance to speak. Look, I just wanted to say I have real sympathy for the amendment that's been put forward by Councillors Watson and Walker. I think I won't be supporting the amendment, granted the explanation that you've given, but what I think we have here now is a very clear highlight of the desire to have people participate in this process and that for discussions to be had. I'm not sure if Jenny is still in the room, but I remember working with Jenny very closely with a lot of these groups before, and the leases we had, and these things were well canvassed. We know that different groups were at that time looking to talk to local board members, and so I'm really clear on some of the pathway that has had and the experiences I had back at that time. So I know that Jenny might be reflecting on this thinking, yeah, this is a bit of deja vu, but the fact of the matter is what I think Councillor Watson and Walker are trying to highlight, and in fairness too, is that all of the discussions are transparent. And so, look, I'm confident, having worked in the local board area with some of these, that the discussions were always robust, and that we asked people to ensure that honest conversations had been had, and we were getting full information, understanding of those conversations. So I think this is raising the level of the transparency on it, which is why I have real sympathy with the amendment. But granted the process that you've walked us and talked us through this morning, Chair, I'm hopeful and relatively confident that we're going to land on a space where everyone is going to have a fair bite at the lease, or at least at having the ability to participate in it. And I'm sure you've been saying that the trust chair is there at the moment. I think it's been highlighted amongst all of us today that there is a deep desire for some honest conversations, and I'm hopeful that officers will come back with an understanding to relay to us. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Collins. Deputy Mayor.
Thanks, Mr. Chair, and thanks to Jenny for the report. This is about appointing, potentially after consultation, a cornerstone leaseholder, and that's the important part. So, and I'd really like to commend CARTS for they've come together as a group and are putting forward a proposal that they want to take some ownership of an area of Colindale to actually develop it for their sport. At the end of last year, at the request of Liam Ventnor and CARTS and Councillor Mulholland, there was a meeting in my office where they discussed their similarities, and they gave undertakings to work together going forward. And there was goodwill and a desired joint up outcome around that meeting. And I haven't heard that there's been any discourse in it, so I'm presuming it's going on quite well. This is the next stage. Let's give the cornerstone leaseholder the lease, and then let them move forward with any collaboration work with the bucket racers, with inline skaters, and with anyone else who may potentially want to partake in the design and delivery of this particular sporting activity and the assets that are around that. And the chair of CARTS is nodding at the back of the room there. So this is where it's going. And I don't think there's any need for the amendment, and we just need to focus on a substantive and deliver a facility enabled by our lease to Carts, and they will work with the other folk to deliver potentially for the other clubs should they wish to become involved. Simple as that.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. If there's no further comments, Councillor Bartley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm the same. I do feel for what Councillors Watson and Walker are trying to see happen here, but I think the point has been made that people just need to talk. And I don't think you need a governing body resolution to make that happen in this instance. When I was on local board, we had the same situation when we were granting a lease, and we had groups that wanted to also be part of that lease. And it was just a matter for those groups to talk together. We would play our role in it by connecting them, but we wouldn't pass a local board resolution to make that happen. It just does come down to relationships, and yeah, you don't need something like this to make that happen. So yeah, I won't be supporting the amendment. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Bartley. If there's no further comments, I'm going to put the amendment. All those in favour?
Aye.
Against?
Aye.
No.
Aye.
Lost on voices. We will now move to the substantive. Any comments? We've had our questions on the substantive with Jenny's report. Any comments?
Yes, just briefly, Mr. Chair.
Yes, Councillor Fletcher.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak, and I'm sorry that I'm having technology problems this morning, but I just want to comment that as the Parks portfolio holder, I have felt quite hurt that I haven't had anybody contact me on this prior to the agenda item.
Yeah, look, I will take the blame for that. My humble apologies, because I know that Jenny and Philippa would not have known that. So I take the blame for that. So my humble apologies, Councillor Fletcher. I will ensure that something like this, that you will get a brief on it.
Thank you.
If there's no further comments, I'm going to put the recommendation. Moved and seconded. All those in favour?
Aye.
Aye.
Against?
No, and record my vote against it.
I'm against.
Councillor Watson.
Yeah.
And the same for Councillor Walker.
And Mulholland.
Ben Sayers, thank you.
Okay, so that's 4. Yeah. Okay then. Thank you. Look, we'll move
No,
to. Yep.
mine also.
Okay. Thank you. So we move to 10. I will move it. The second, Councillor Casey. No questions or comments. I will put the recommendation. All those in favour?
Aye.
Against? Carried. So look, we're there's nothing in regards to 12. So look, I'll call this to a halt and a close. So look, thank you everybody. I'm just going to now ask Claudia to end up. There's about just have a break for 5 minutes, but Claudia is just going to give us. I think it's about 6 or